Hello, everyone, and welcome to Magma Rages episode 46. With me today, I have Penguin and SaltyMonkey, and we're going to be discussing worlds and a bunch of other stuff. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you. 46. That's a really big number. I can't count that high.
Yeah, almost about a year. I mean, there's been 1 or 2 weeks we've taken off, so we're definitely nearing a year of doing the podcast, which seems like a really long time. But yeah, 46 episodes in, and we're still going. And speaking of a year, um, the year of Hearthstone, the year of the Mammoth, came to an end this last weekend with the Hearthstone World Championships. It was really great to watch. For those that didn't catch it, this is going to be spoilers. Tom took home the prize for first place and was crowned our new world champion. It was definitely a very interesting finals, as well as like I think some of the games to lead up the semi-finals for me were some of the highlights. In particular, I think and the quarterfinals, in fact, as well. I think that Cinderella Frozen game, for instance, in the
Oh, that was
quarterfinals was
incredible.
yeah, that was like a ridiculously good game to watch. Um, what were your guys like highlights? Any particular games, any particular plays even that you thought were amazing?
Yeah, I have one player that because I voted for Frozen, mainly because his lineup was similar to the one I took to WESG. Um, and I was completely convinced that he'd lost the game. He was playing Raza Priest or Highlander Priest, and he was sitting there. I can't exactly remember. I have to rack my brain now, but I was thinking, there's no way that he's going to survive this. And he ended up winning that game 2 rounds later. Um, and then the game directly after, uh, he was playing Q Block, and there was this one play where he had to make a decision either to heal or to like try and go aggressive, and he ended up cubing the Mistress, which turned out to be the perfect play because that
Mm.
was the turnaround from him, and from there, and he ended up winning. So like I think both of those consecutively for me was the absolute highlight. Not only because I voted for Frozen, but because I thought his plays were just so extremely smart.
Yeah, I mean, Frozen did do extremely well, better than we predicted. I mean, last week's Magma Rages episode, um, Scythe and I kind of did some predictions, and they didn't turn out that well. Out of all the quarterfinals, the only one we actually got right to the position was the Cincelol Frozen one, and that one we assumed Cincelol would win because he was actually heavily favored there. And I mean, you heard Frozen speaking
Yeah,
about
he
it as
was.
well. Like Frozen said that he
Mm.
should never win that series. Like before the series even started, like when he won to get through the quarterfinals, he said, yeah, he should always lose to Cincelol. He's gonna need a miracle, and then he did. He pulled off a miracle. He said that was the hardest game or series of Hearthstone he's ever played. Um, because of how like unfavored he was based on the lineups. So that was definitely an impressive win for him in the quarterfinals. And I mean, I think overall a lot of the people that we didn't necessarily expect to get that far. I mean, Doc Pone and Samuel Sao got very far as kind of the like underdog stories of the tournament. And even Tom, like he's been around for so long. He was at the 2014 Hearthstone World Championship, so he's definitely a well-known player. But I don't think he was, on our radar really for champion overall. Like, I mean, uh, Muzzy, the one I voted for, he unfortunately was knocked out in the group
Didn't
stage.
do as well as we thought. Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't quite do as
Mm.
well. And I mean, I think big talking points of the tournament were some of the lineups, right? We saw the Jade Druid lineups doing relatively well, a little bit better than the Aggro Druid lineups. For a lot of the
Yeah.
players, they had like a Tempo Rogue, Controller Q Block, and Raza Priest, and then they basically had that fourth deck, which was their Druid, which was either kind of Aggro or Jade Druid. And a little bit more of the Jade Druids seemed to do well because a lot of them were just banning Warlocks instead and trying to beat the Priests with the Jade Druid, for instance.
Mm.
And the other big
Mm.
talking points we saw was that both of the mage decks did quite well. I mean, that was something when we looked at it before that we did predict that Cincelol and Frozen would both make it out of their groups. The only two mage players there with their kind of big spell control mages that both did really
Mm-hmm.
well. And I think that was definitely one of the talking points. I think that deck and its performance. I mean, we saw it banned most times for Frozen, and what he had to say about that was basically every time they ban it, he gets to play both Q Block and Raza Priest, which are two of the best decks in the format. So he's pretty
Yeah.
happy with that.
I, and I think pretty much them banning the mage at the end of the day kind of played into that whole game plan of his. I mean, if you get to play the probably two best classes and deck archetypes at the moment in terms of the meta, like you just increase your chances of winning, that matchup, and moving on to the next best matchup that you'll probably have, which would then be the other one of the decks that you didn't get to play at the end of the day. So I think players banning the mage kind of just played into his plan, which I think why his lineup that he brought to the championship was favored so heavily.
Yeah. I mean, there was like a lot of exciting games. Some of those control mage games in particular were very interesting to watch. How players navigated the Frostlich Janers. In particular, there was the one with the Scintillol game where I think he Draconid Operative, whatever. He got a Frosted Jaina from the Draconid Operative.
You're right.
With his no, I was trying to think of what the verb would be for that. Anyway,
Draconid Operative.
Yeah, Draconid Operative. Anyway, he
Yeah.
got a Frosted Jaina, and then he had one in his combo Priest. The one running the Dragon Priest running Divine Spirit in a fire. And that was just a really interesting game to watch. I mean, Frozen said, afterwards that he doesn't think either of them have ever played a game like that. It was very much having to think about the best ways to play around the double Frosted Jainas on the spot. In a deck doesn't usually have access to Frosted Jaina in that Priest.
True.
So that was a really interesting game.
I remember us speaking about the Dragon Priest on a previous Magma Rages episode where I said exactly this. It's a magical deck that does insane things that you do not expect whatsoever. It just adds this crazy flavor. To be fair, it is a little bit RNG based. It can go either way. But it's why I absolutely love either playing the deck or watching it being played, because you do get these situations where you're like, this is insane. All of a sudden, you've got such different angles that you can use to approach your entire matchup. Yeah,
there's obviously the two very different versions of the deck. The Spiteful Summoner one, which gives you even more craziness with getting, your charges or boogie monsters or anything weird off your Spiteful Summoners. And then there's also like the combo variant, and obviously both of them have access to that Draconid Operative as well, which can lead to lots of wacky scenarios as well.
Shenanigans.
Shenanigans indeed. And I mean, I would definitely encourage anyone to go back and watch any of those VODs, in particular the Scintillol Frozen one. I thought was really interesting. And obviously, if you didn't watch the finals, that would have been is a great one to watch as well. I mean, one of the best things I think that made this championship for me was actually just being able to watch it all live, because it was
no VODs.
Yeah, it was it was in Amsterdam, right? So it was on our time basically. So it worked out so well for us, essentially on the European time, that we could watch it all live. I mean, for the first few days it was during the day, which was awkward for most people, but it definitely helped a lot. And I think that's a nice consideration from Blizzard hosting it in Europe for a change, and I think that makes a big difference to a lot of the viewer base.
Yeah, especially considering that Europe probably has one of the biggest viewerships of Hearthstone, I feel. Well, I definitely feel that it's probably one of the biggest regions in terms of Hearthstone. I mean, if you just look at the number of competitors that qualified, I mean, if you kind of extrapolate that to the number of people that are playing on the European servers or whatever, or within that time zone at least, there's definitely, I feel, a bigger community in terms of that. So, I mean, that's why the viewership was also really good. And, just being able to time it like that, because, I mean, you're pretty much hitting midnight everything on your APAC areas. You're hitting prime time for EU and early mornings for NA. So kind of prime time-ish, I think, considering where your majority of your viewer base was coming from. So GG.
Yeah.
So GG Blizzard to that one.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to quickly touch on the regions? Because I know there was a bit of a discussion about it where everyone was like, oh, EU region going to do so well. And then Tom being like the first ever Asia player type thing to win one of these.
Yeah.
Do you guys quickly want to touch on that? Because I know it's sort of just there, but I find it rather interesting to
I think
to analyze.
I had some questions from some players that are newer to the scene, like during my streams after the games. But well, what's with this whole like regional based rivalry? Like it seems a bit random. And I mean, like for
Yeah.
largely, it's generally been between like EU and NA as to like, oh, who can perform
Yeah.
better at the different seasonal championships, and who gets more players through. And I mean, a lot of the debate is like I feel is that EU has such a deep player base. There are so many good EU players that weren't at this tournament. Like and
Yeah.
the
True.
competitive level when you're playing for like EU ladder and for like cups, that depth in the EU like region is just so ridiculous. I feel, and that's really where like a lot of the perception of EU as the strongest region comes through. Whereas like NA, in particular America, has just some really like some of the best players in the world. Frozen, who he hasn't really shown it since the Winter Championships, as he's kind of been able to take a break after qualifying. But he definitely came back in force in this in Worlds. And I mean, we also have like Muzzy, who's often renowned as pretty much one of the best players in the world, if not the best.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the interesting things with the regions. I think for like NA, it's a lot shallower, and I think APAC has a similar problem in that they have some of their top players. They do perform really well. We've seen Kranich in the past making multiple world championships. Tom here making his second world championship and winning it at Disco. And I mean, for a long time, he's kind of said that he's the best APAC player as well. That's kind of been a
Yes.
self-claim of his. And I feel like at the top level, there isn't as much competition in APAC, but their top players are absolutely top players. I mean, we saw Surrender also representing APAC really
Yes.
well, even though for him, the majority of his like practice partners and people he plays with are European. So I mean, we saw like Sixo, his teammates on Twitter, going like, "Surrender is a proxy European. Don't worry, we got this." Uh, even though
Yeah.
like all
Yeah.
his interviews are definitely in Korean. I think he does speak a lot more English than we see him speak on like the interviews and stuff, because obviously he has English teammates or teammates that speak English that he has to communicate with. So I mean, APAC was definitely the surprise region, but I think all of these regions, they have certain like top players that are really good, and the big debate for me comes in, at least in terms of the depth of the regions, and that's how I see it, as somebody competing at least.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, I'd also definitely noticed that in during my days of when I was a big competitive player, not so much anymore, but definitely when I was participating in the Zotac tournaments, back in the day, there were a lot like the depth of the skill base and everything of the European players just seemed to be so deep, and it just seems to continue like that, and it just seems to just getting bigger and bigger at this point in time. But
Yeah.
definitely the surprise region was the APAC region. I don't think a lot of people expect them to do as well as they did, because they always just seemed to be, behind. Everybody had this perception that APAC were, behind in terms of Hearthstone esports,
Mm.
whereas just about everything else, they're pretty much ahead of everyone.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
And this is basically just showing that, what, they're actually not as far behind, if at all behind, where the rest of the world is in terms of it.
yeah, I mean, it's hard
Yeah.
to say they're behind when they're now have the world champion, and I mean, they had like two of the four semi-finalists, and I mean, I think Samuel Sa was the biggest surprise out of the APAC players at least. But he brought decks he was really comfortable with, and I mean, Tom spoke about how good he is at piloting aggressive decks, and it worked pretty well for him, obviously, only falling to his compatriot. And I mean, it's also really good for those regions, right? Like as people involved in Hearthstone, as casters, players, etc. We obviously want the general pool of Hearthstone players to grow and for things to become more competitive.
Yeah.
And I think getting more of the APAC regions involved and piquing interest there can only be good for Hearthstone. I mean, traditionally in card games, we've seen Japan be like a massive massively strong nation for card games, like in Magic the Gathering and stuff.
Mm.
And we've seen, Korea's been always a strong place for esports. So it's going to be interesting to see, those two kind of colliding as well. I'll be very interested to see if we get more Korean players interested now, after seeing Surrender do so well, which is a
Yeah.
scary prospect. When Korea gets serious about something, it gets quite scary. You only have to look
Yeah.
at the Overwatch League to see how scary that can get.
CL Dynasty.
Yeah. Well, and the London team, which is also all Korean, and there's other teams
Yeah.
that are also all Korean, but yeah.
They did esports the right way.
Yeah, they are very passionate about the esports, so it will be very interesting to see if the Koreans get more involved, and the Japanese as well. For me, like as somebody coming from a Magic the Gathering background, that's a really interesting one for me to see them get more involved. We saw them do relatively well in their regional championships, but they haven't really made that international breakout. And I think APAC's definitely going to be a
Mm.
region to watch this year.
Absolutely. Let's quickly just say for those that might be watching this that are just starting out with Hearthstone, because very much this year for me, I want to focus very much on involving new players, sort of growing the community. So when you're starting up, and if you're watching this and you're thinking about, hey, I really want to start playing Hearthstone, how do I get into this, and which server do I start playing on? This might seem rather confusing to you because South Africa gets lobbed into APAC when we play WESG. So you might be rather tempted to go play on the APAC server because they look at all of these brilliant players on the APAC. Let's quickly just explain to them which server, and we'll do it really quickly for you, which server would be better for a South African player to enter into if you're just newly starting out.
Yeah, so some players definitely make the mistake, well, you could call it a mistake of starting on the wrong
They
server, and that,
can't.
that can be kind of awkward. For most of the South African stuff that happens, for our firesides, and most of those kind of South African events, ESL Africa, all of that kind of stuff, it happens on the European server. So pretty much the whole of Africa falls under Europe as a region as far as Blizzard's concerned. So if you are starting out, definitely you want to be starting out on the European server. Um, that's definitely the place to be. When you start getting to like a higher level and you want to be competing on multiple servers, then the grind really happens. Having to up your card collection on all the servers. I mean, we had Mainland
Yeah.
on previously who does compete in all three regions. I mean, as we mentioned, I think was Magma Rage's episode 44, reached legend in all three regions in Wild and Standard in December, which is just absolutely nuts.
Absolutely crazy.
He's obviously got far too much leave, apparently, because some of us were still working.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you can definitely play multiple regions for Hearthstone, but definitely if you're starting out in South Africa or Africa in general, you want to be starting out on the European region, as that's going to be the one that's going to be mostly used for firesides and other events.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also why we in South Africa can sometimes be a little bit biased towards the European players or the European region. As for us, we have to say that's the strongest one. That's the one we compete under.
We
Which is
like believing that, definitely.
yeah, yeah. And speaking of South African competition, actually before we get to that, there was one other funny moment at the World Championships, which I know Penguin and I certainly enjoyed, and that was Blizzard firing their load a little bit early on that confetti cannon. When Tom was 0-2 down in the final, they fired the confetti, and like you could see he seemed visibly annoyed. To me, it seemed like that was almost what invigorated him to reverse sweep Frozen from that point. I mean, I think that's a little bit uh, probably a little bit simplistic view of it, but yeah, I mean that was a very awkward moment, but definitely a good meme that can come from this World Championship. As we know, Hearthstone is not all about the serious; it's also about the memes.
It's always only about the memes at the end of the day. Well, for me at least.
Yeah. And I mean, I
But
think
yeah.
there was a good amount of memeing. I especially enjoyed that Ben Brode when they were asking questions from the audience with TJ and Brian Kiblen that asking questions, and TJ's guessed the card, which was the obvious card or creeper meme. That one was pretty good as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
moving on to more local news. We have the WESG qualifiers coming up soon. These are the general qualifiers. SaltyMonkey was our representative that's just come back from China, pretty much, competing in what was essentially the APAC finals for the women's Hearthstone side of things, which works quite differently to the general side of
Yeah.
things. Like for the upcoming qualifiers, it's open to male and female players. And instead of having another qualifier that the winner would go to, they advance directly to the like the grand finals that are happening in China. I'm not exactly sure when those are happening, but
Yes,
we're gonna have
in March.
in
They're in
March.
March.
Okay, we're
Yeah.
gonna have one representative from Southern Africa, which includes um, our Southern African neighbors.
SADC based.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, basically. I mean, there's
Mm.
only one non-South African player competing, which is Henryless from Madagascar. We've seen in the ESL African Championships.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm pretty
and
happy that he's actually competing in this as well.
yeah, it's pretty good to see. Um, but yeah, I mean, and there'll be also one North African representative, so it's going to be good to see at least two African representatives at
Yeah.
WESG for the main event. I myself am going to be competing in that, but you guys are also going to be involved. How are you going to be involved in the WESG?
Am I going to
Yeah.
spoil this now, Yana, or
Yeah,
are
you're
you
more
going
than
to?
welcome to. Absolutely.
Okay, well, myself and Yana are actually going to be casting the semi-finals and finals on Saturday and Sunday of the WSG qualifiers. That are happening midday on Saturday, and then I believe late morning on the Sunday. We don't actually have the full timetable yet, but you can always check out Medal State. They will be able to give out all the details via Twitter and Facebook of where the stream's going to be at.
Hmm.
So you'll be able to catch anything and everything that you need to know via their social media pages. And if I'm not mistaken, Yana, I believe this is your debut Hearthstone cast as well, pretty much.
This will be indeed. I never thought that the first time casting would be for Hearthstone, but I'm absolutely keen on doing it. Um, Perhaps slightly nerve-wracking, but
Ah,
we'll do the best that we absolutely can. Really prepared for it. I'm lying. Can you tell? We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, but I
at the
think
end,
I think
ask that they play Yogg. On when Yogg is green, they play it,
uh,
and you just watch the memes roll from there,
I don't
and
know
just
how many
Lovely,
commentate
yeah,
it.
true.
I don't know how many people are going to be playing Yogg. I'm hoping not too many as a competitor
Oh,
myself,
oh,
but
maybe
we'll see.
with like a nice little big spell mage there. And I'll be honest, if someone would please be so kind as to actually bring a big spell mage, so that we can cast some of these fancy shenanigans, that'd be fantastic. I had the unfortunate situation of having to prepare for WSG in China against a big spell mage. And it had me absolutely raging the day before I had to play semi-finals, so much so that I absolutely decided I will be banning this deck, no matter if I then have to play against Control Warlock. So I would love to actually have someone bring a big spell mage and see what it does in that matchup and whether or not it's going to be banned, and we'll be seeing a Q block being played, or how that matchup will be approached. So if any of you that are watching are actually playing and you're expecting to make the semifinals, please bring me a big spell mage. I will be forever your fan.
Yeah, well, if they do, they are obviously going to have to first make the semi-finals, which it's going to be quite a tough bracket. It's quite an odd
Yes.
bracket. I can't say I'm particularly happy as a competitor with the way the bracket is done at the moment. Basically, the top half of the bracket is extremely stacked, in my opinion, with the bottom half basically all having a bye in their first round and just automatically going through to the round of 8, which seems like a very, very odd bracket system. But I'm just gonna have to. I'm on the upper side of that bracket, and if I win my first game and Menlin wins his, we're gonna be facing each other, which is not something that either of us was particularly pleased with. But yeah, I
Mm.
mean, it is definitely going to be a very tough bracket on that upper half, in my opinion, and hopefully we should at least get a very good representative out of that. That's really ultimately what matters to me, is that we, put forward a very good representative that can do well in China. I think whoever wins, I'm definitely going to be, willing to help them prepare for China, as I obviously really do enjoy actually like preparing lineups and all of that, and helping people prepare can actually be quite fun for me. So I'm hoping that whoever wins is a deserving player that really does manage to represent Southern Africa well in China.
No,
But yeah,
I definitely agree with that as well. Like, it'll be great if we can get another South African to represent us, like we had a Scythe winning year South Africa. So,
mm, yeah. It'll definitely be really good, and I definitely encourage anyone that's newer to Hearthstone to tune in as well. I'm sure you guys will make the stream a little bit more noob friendly, at least.
it's what I specialize in.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean,
I am a noob. Talk
I
to
don't.
noobs all day.
I don't want to say exactly, but yeah.
It's a very
It'll
nice tip.
definitely be worth your while to check out and to see some local Hearthstone action. So I definitely encourage everyone. It also it's good to see Metal State getting involved with Hearthstone. Whether it was by choice or just because WESG requires a Hearthstone part, hopefully we'll see Metal State getting more involved in the future in Hearthstone as well. It's always good to see more, tournament organizers coming to the table, and they did a lot of good work last year in other esports that I know. Well, I know SaltyMonkey, you were involved in some of the CS stuff at least, right?
Yeah.
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 Mm.
Concerning this, I think we had a discussion about it previously, and I don't want
Yeah.
to sound like a broken record and keep bringing it up. But there is absolutely no reason why a Hearthstone player should not be competing internationally, and why it shouldn't be one of the most popular games in South Africa, just due to its accessibility. Hence, I actually think Metal State, hopefully after this encounter that they're having with Hearthstone, that they might actually start favoring it. I understand that it's not as popular as CSGO might be, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be even more popular than CSGO, just purely because it is the everyman's game in terms of like strategy, accessibility, just all round.
Yeah.
So hopefully this will be the beginning of some good things for Hearthstone this year.
Yeah, and I mean we've seen in other esports some teams sending their players overseas now to compete. But
Yeah.
that's one of the big things with Hearthstone is you don't have to go overseas. You can play from home basically, almost regardless of your internet connection, as long as it's stable. You can play because ping isn't an issue so much, and that's
Yeah.
a big factor for, I mean, personally, why I chose Hearthstone as well as like a esport to get so involved in. Not just because I enjoy the game or card games. It's also just because of that kind of factor. So that is something that's really big for all those people that are interested in playing esports more seriously as well. So,
Yeah, like I play Hearthstone in the bath when I'm able to.
Okay, that's maybe a little bit too much information.
I'm just saying what other people are doing and not too afraid to say it out loud.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That is
like a
true.
certain president apparently. But before we find out a little bit too much more about Penguin and his Hearthstone habits, that's going to be the end of this episode. Thanks a lot for joining me. Do you guys have any shout outs or call outs you want to make before we close off today's episode?
Hi, Mom.
Yeah. No, I actually have legitimate ones because I am sending this link over to all of the friends that I made in Asia. Well, like in the Asia region that came through to WSG in China, that are all taking a real interest in the South African Hearthstone players and will be watching this weekend and will be watching this specifically. So just want to say hi to all of them and thanks for supporting South African Hearthstone and helping all of us out as much as they can.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely good to get some more interest in getting, some foreign interest in South African Hearthstone will be really cool. So that's really great. It's amazing what these kind of events can do for like networking as well, which is pretty good.
Absolutely. Or more than that, they changed a lot of the ways that I would think about certain plays just because they come from a different perspective. It's always nice to integrate that because it's also always nice to have options in Hearthstone. There's not just one correct play, so it's really good to have them around.
Except playing Yogg when he's green. That's the only right play ever. Also, that is definitely not something that you should listen to me about.
No.
Don't do that. Don't.
No.
It's not right.
But yeah, I mean, if people want to find you, they can find you guys on Twitter, right? I mean, we've got your Twitter handles below you over there, at SaltyMonkey with an H. Yeah, below you. It's an easy one to point. And then Penguin at the Penguin ZA. I believe you also do some streaming, Penguin. I've been streaming some Hearthstone and by my encouragement playing terrible decks with Snowflipper Penguins and autofills.
Yeah, that is on Twitch at the Penguin ZA, and yeah, if you ever want to see me rage because these autofill decks are absolutely atrocious, you must definitely come by. #sellout.
Well, that's the point of this end segment, right? Anyone that stays for the end segment knows that they're getting the sellout speeches.
That's
um,
during the part we're like, Alt F4, okay, done. Next thing.
any other social media you wanna let people know about, Salty Monkey?
No, I think my Instagram is the most active,
Ah,
but it's the same as my Twitter, so
okay.
you'll find me. Don't worry about it.
Cool. And if you want to find out more about the podcast, you can follow the Twitch channel, my Twitch channel, which is D1B underscore, or you can follow the YouTube, where this will be uploaded as well. You can subscribe there because that subscription is free. Uh, and yeah, obviously just like and
But
leave
you
any
don't get the
comments,
pretty emote.
any kind of feedback. Yeah, you don't get the dib creep Twitch emotes, which is now a thing, and Penguin has because he so kindly subscribed to my channel. But yeah, anyway, thanks a lot for watching this, and yeah, if you have any feedback for us, you know where to find us. Thanks a lot, and cheerio, everyone.